a quiet place where curiosity doesn't rush and wonder takes its time. Tonight I want to invite you into a thought that at first sounds like science fiction, but the longer you sit with it, the more it lingers. Imagine for a moment that Earth isn't simply a planet born of dust and chaos and chance, but something more deliberate. What if this blue and green world, with its storms and forests and cities and heartbreaks, is in fact a kind of field? Not a field of crops, not a meadow with flowers swaying in the breeze, but a test field. A place prepared to see what life would do when given the right conditions. Take a breath with that idea. Let it settle in for a moment. Because if it's true, if Earth is more than just a natural accident, then every struggle, every extinction, every civilization that has ever risen and collapsed might not be random at all. It might be part of the test. And before we wander deeper, let me ask you something small but grounding. Where are you listening from right now? Are you tucked into bed, easing into the edges of sleep? Are you sitting in a dim room after a long day, letting your mind finally slow? Or maybe you're on the other side of the world where the sun is still high, and the idea of drifting to sleep feels far away. Whatever the case, take note of this moment. The temperature of the air, the sound in the room, the feeling in your chest. Now imagine gently that even this tiny moment, this now, was always meant to be observed. The suggestion can feel unsettling, even eerie, because no one likes the thought of being watched. Yet there is another side to it. If Earth is a test field, then our lives are not meaningless. We are not drifting alone on a small planet in an indifferent universe. We are part of something larger, something intentional. There's comfort in that possibility. Not proof, but a whisper that maybe the story of Earth has always been more than dust and chance. Think about how the world itself seems prepared for this role. Our planet sits in a narrow zone where it's neither too hot nor too cold. We have water, air, a magnetic field that shields us from radiation, tectonic plates that recycle nutrients. We orbit a stable star in a relatively calm region of the galaxy. Of all the possible outcomes in space, this one is suspiciously balanced. You can call it coincidence, you can call it luck, but if you let the thought breathe a little longer, you might wonder if it feels like design. As if the conditions were set up carefully, like a laboratory arranged before the experiment begins. And the experiment itself seems to be change. Life didn't appear once and remain static. It has shifted, adapted, grown stranger and more complex across billions of years. Fish walked onto land, reptiles gave way to mammals, apes became humans who built cities and stories. Every step looks like trial and error, iteration after iteration, as if someone wanted to see just how far survival could stretch. But survival alone doesn't explain everything. Consider extinction. More than 99% of all species that ever lived are gone. Wiped out by asteroids, ice ages, volcanic eruptions, sudden shifts in climate. On one level that's tragedy, but on another it looks like a reset. A clearing of the board to see what comes next. Dinosaurs dominated for millions of years, then an asteroid reset the game, opening the path for mammals and eventually for us. That's not random chaos. It feels almost instructive. And so here we are, the newest participants. Humanity. Creatures who not only survive, but ask questions about survival. Creatures who tell stories, build machines, and stay up late wondering if there is meaning behind it all. Maybe that too is part of the test. Maybe the very fact that you and I are here, pondering whether Earth is a field of experiments, is itself a sign that the test has entered a new stage. And if this is a stage, then what's being measured? Is it intelligence, compassion, resilience? Is it whether we destroy ourselves with the tools we've created, or whether we learn to live with balance? Perhaps it isn't a single question with a single answer. Perhaps the whole experiment is just about watching us unfold, seeing what choices we make when placed in a world both beautiful and brutal. But that's a thought for later. For now, I just want you to sit with this single idea. gentle and strange as it is. Earth as a test field. Not proven, not disproven, but waiting in the background like a quiet possibility. The oceans, the mountains, the stories of civilizations long gone, the very moment you're in right now. What if all of it was never random? What if it was always meant to be? Alright, let's ease into this next thought without rushing it. The idea that Earth might be a test field is already unusual, but the moment you let it in, even just as a possibility, everything else starts to shift. Because if we're being tested, then nothing is truly ordinary anymore. Every moment, every choice, every rise and collapse of history takes on another layer of meaning. It isn't just about survival in the raw biological sense. It's about being observed, evaluated, perhaps even guided, though in ways we don't always recognise. Pause for a second and look at the small details of human life. We wake up, we work, we laugh, we argue, we worry about bills, we cook dinner, we fall in love, we get sick, we grow old. These things feel personal, private, random. But in a test field view, they could be data points. How do creatures respond to routine, to scarcity, to joy, to loss? How do we adapt not just biologically, but emotionally and socially? In a sense, our daily struggles could be the experiment's most important content, not the grand wars or the giant extinctions, but the quiet, ordinary ways in which we carry ourselves through life. Think about history with this lens. Civilizations rise, sometimes brilliantly. They invent writing, architecture, navigation, mathematics. Then they collapse, sometimes suddenly, leaving ruins that later generations marvel at. Why the pattern? Why does it repeat across so many parts of the world? Maybe it's not only human weakness or bad luck. Maybe it's part of the test itself, like running multiple trials with slightly different conditions to see how outcomes vary. What happens when people discover agriculture in fertile valleys? What happens when empires stretch too far? What happens when technology leaps faster than wisdom? Each result, successful or catastrophic, could be a way of measuring us. If we're being tested, the test doesn't seem to be gentle. It has included plagues, famines, natural disasters, invasions, and endless conflict. Why make it so harsh? One answer could be that resilience is only visible under pressure. A structure that's never shaken can't prove its strength. So maybe the reason life on Earth faces wave after wave of hardship is not cruelty, but calibration. You don't know what a species is capable of until you put it through extremes. But maybe it's not just about resilience. Maybe it's about choice. The test might not be to see whether we can survive, but how we survive. Do we become selfish, violent, destructive when pressed? Or do we build cooperation, compassion, creativity? When technology gives us fire, do we only burn with it? Or do we also learn to cook and forge? When we split the atom, do we only make weapons? Or do we also make medicine and energy? Each turning point feels like a question posed to humanity. Not yes or no, not right or wrong, but revealing. And then there's the possibility that the test isn't limited to us. Perhaps the entire tree of life is part of it. Plants evolving to photosynthesize, insects to pollinate, predators and prey shaping each other in endless cycles. Every adaptation, every extinction, could be part of a larger picture. Maybe the point isn't even just human civilization, but life itself, tested in all its forms to see how it diversifies, interacts and reshapes the planet. In that sense, we're not the only subjects. We're simply the current stage. The thought that we're being tested also shifts how we see failure. Usually when a species dies out or when a society collapses, we think of it as tragedy or waste. But in an experiment, failure is not meaningless. Failure provides information. If the dinosaurs had not failed the asteroid test, mammals would never have had their chance. If Rome had not fallen, the Renaissance might never have bloomed centuries later. From the test perspective, what looks like disaster may simply be the necessary step toward the next outcome. But of course, the thought also unsettles us. Who is running the test? Is it aliens? as some speculate, civilizations so advanced they can seed planets and watch them grow like gardens? Is it our own descendants? Perhaps with technology that lets them simulate the past in ways we can't even imagine? Is it something more abstract, a universal intelligence or a higher order of reality that is curious about itself? And why this planet? Why us? Are we unique? Or are there countless other test fields scattered across the galaxy, each with its own set of trials? There's another layer to this that touches the edge of philosophy. If we're being tested, then are we free? Do we really choose our actions, or are we only following conditions set up for us? Some would say a test field is just a maze, and we are like mice reacting as expected. Others would argue that the maze itself doesn't dictate how you move through it. The walls are there, the challenges are arranged, but the path you carve is your own. If that's true, then the test isn't about control at all. It's about revelation. It reveals who we are when faced with boundaries, temptations, and opportunities. Let's linger for a moment on the idea of boundaries. Human life is full of them. We cannot live forever. We cannot fly unaided. We cannot escape the need for food, water, sleep. We are limited by time, by mortality, by the fragility of our bodies. But perhaps those limits are part of the design. What better way to test what creatures will do with their lives than to make those lives finite? What better way to see what choices we make than to give us both potential and constraint? Without limits, without risk of loss, maybe nothing would matter at all. And then there are the temptations: greed, power, violence, indifference. History shows how often we fall into them, how civilizations crumble because of them, but it also shows how often people resist them, sometimes at great cost. Maybe the test is not to see whether temptation exists, but to see how often it is resisted. Opportunity is the last piece. Humanity has been given immense opportunities to build, to discover, to connect. The printing press, the internet, vaccines, electricity, space travel, each one could be seen as another stage of the test. What do you do with this gift? Does it bring more division or more unity? Does it create destruction or progress? In a test field, the opportunities are as revealing as the obstacles. So here we are, sitting with a thought that changes everything. Earth, not random, but prepared. Life, not accidental, but observed. History, not chaotic, but patterned. It doesn't make the suffering lighter or the uncertainty easier, but it frames them differently. Maybe the experiment is not cruel. Maybe it's curious. Maybe the universe isn't indifferent. Maybe it's invested. Maybe all of us, from the earliest bacteria to the latest city, are part of something waiting to see what will become. There comes a point, once the idea has slipped into your mind that Earth might be more than a random accident, when questions start bubbling up on their own. They don't wait politely in line. They arrive all at once. The kind of questions you can't help but ask because they touch something deep inside. If this is a test field, then who set it up? Why here? Why us? What are we supposed to be proving? The first question is almost unavoidable. Who is watching? If the universe is full of galaxies, stars and planets, then perhaps we're not alone. Maybe there are civilizations unimaginably older and wiser than ours, with technology so advanced it makes ours look like children playing with sticks. Could they have chosen this small world, carefully placed it in just the right orbit, seeded it with the ingredients of life, and stepped back to watch it unfold? We've already tried to imagine them in our stories. Aliens in silver ships, beings of light, mysterious visitors who slip in and out of myth. But what if they don't need ships at all? What if they are so far ahead that their experiments look to us like nature itself? Then another question follows. What if it isn't aliens, but us? What if the test field is a project of humanity's own descendants, running simulations of the past to learn how their ancestors lived and failed? We already build computer models of climate, disease and economics, Scale that up across centuries, and maybe one day they will model entire worlds, entire histories. In that scenario, our lives could be part of a vast simulation designed not for cruelty, but for curiosity. Future humans watching past humans to understand themselves better. And if that's the case, then what we call reality might simply be the most detailed research experiment ever conceived. But then the harder question slips in. Why would anyone bother? If Earth is a test field, what's the purpose? Is it to measure resilience, to see how life adapts to endless challenges? Is it to test morality, to see how often we choose kindness over cruelty? Is it to measure intelligence, to see how far we can push ourselves in understanding the universe? Or is it something we can't even imagine, a purpose hidden beyond our comprehension, the way a laboratory mouse cannot grasp the logic of the scientist studying it? And if there is a purpose, another question presses forward. What does success look like? If Earth is a test, what does it mean to pass? Is survival itself enough? Is building technology enough? Is compassion the key, or cooperation, or something more subtle? Maybe the test is not pass or fail at all, but an ongoing measurement, a way to gather data on how life behaves when given freedom, intelligence, and pressure. Maybe there isn't a final score, only patterns, results, and insights that matter to whoever is running the test. As these questions unfold, another one lingers in the background. Do we even have free will in this scenario? If we're being tested, are our actions truly our own, or are we only reacting to conditions set up around us? If an asteroid wipes out dinosaurs, did mammals choose to rise, or were they simply filling space left behind? If humanity develops nuclear weapons, are we choosing danger, or are we pushed by the inevitable trajectory of technology? Are we free explorers, or are we data points following a script? But perhaps the most haunting question of all is this. If Earth is a test field, who is it for? Is it for the watchers to gather information? Is it for us to shape us into something greater? Or is it for the universe itself, a way of asking its own questions through the medium of life? And once you begin asking these, you can't really stop. They echo in the quiet moments, like the ticking of a clock you can't ignore. What if every war, every invention, every act of cruelty or kindness is not just history, but experiment? What if even now, in this very moment, the question being asked is how we respond to the thought that we might be tested? Do we panic? Do we resist? Do we find meaning? The questions don't come with answers, at least not yet. But maybe that's the point. Maybe in a test field, asking the questions is part of the process. Because what kind of experiment would it be if the subjects never even wondered what was happening? Maybe curiosity itself is one of the things being measured. Imagine standing back from the Earth for a moment, not just physically but in thought, as if you could see it not only as a home but as a kind of experiment in progress. When you pull your perspective out that far, the planet begins to look less like a random accident and more like a carefully set stage. A laboratory, if you will, though not the sterile kind with white walls and microscopes, but a vast living one where every forest, ocean, desert and city becomes part of the test. Consider first the strange perfection of our situation. The Earth orbits in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone, that thin band of distance from the sun where it's not too hot and not too cold, where liquid water can exist. Our planet has a protective magnetic field that shields us from radiation, an atmosphere balanced enough to trap heat but not suffocate us, and tectonic plates that recycle minerals and shape continents. Each of these features is rare, yet all of them align here in one place. You could call it chance, but you could also see it as preparation, as though the conditions were deliberately tuned to run an experiment on life itself. And life, once it appeared, didn't simply sit still. It multiplied, mutated, spread, and diversified into countless forms. From single-celled organisms to the tangled web of ecosystems we see today, Earth has been a stage for trial and error. Evolution is often described as a blind process, random mutations filtered by survival. But if you imagine Earth as a test field, evolution begins to look like a method of experimentation, a way to explore the possible shapes life can take under different pressures. Think about mass extinctions. They're usually told as tragedies, moments when life nearly ended. But from another angle, they look like resets. The end of the dinosaurs wasn't just destruction. It cleared space for mammals to thrive. Ice ages reshaped ecosystems, forcing species to adapt or perish. Each cataclysm functions like a variable adjusted in a laboratory test. What happens to life under heat, under cold, under sudden scarcity? What emerges when the rules change? Even the smallest details of biology suggest experimentation. The genetic code, with its elegant simplicity, can be compared to a universal programming language. Every living thing on Earth uses the same four-letter code, shuffled in endless combinations, like an experimenter reusing a standard template to test different outcomes. Why invent a new code each time when one flexible system can be used again and again? Then look at ecosystems. They are not random collections of organisms, but tightly interconnected systems where each species influences others. Predator and prey, pollinator and flower, parasite and host. It is almost as if balance itself is being tested. What happens when one species dominates too strongly? What happens when cooperation is stronger than competition? Nature constantly reconfigures, adjusting variables like a scientist running iteration after iteration, collecting results over millions of years. Humans, of course, add a new layer. We are not only participants but observers, capable of noticing patterns and asking whether they are tests. We build societies, invent technologies, and then confront the consequences of those inventions. Fire kept us warm but also burned down forests. Agriculture fed millions but altered landscapes. Industry gave us power but also pollution. Each leap forward feels like a question. What will you do with this? Will you use it to flourish or to falter? And history shows both answers. Sometimes we collapse under the weight of our own creations. Sometimes we rise stronger, reshaping the world yet again. It's as if humanity itself is a running trial, exploring what happens when intelligence is added to the mix. How far will it go? How destructive? How creative? There are moments when the resemblance to a laboratory becomes uncanny. Diseases that spread like tests of resilience. Natural disasters that force sudden adaptation. Resources that appear abundant at first, then dwindle, pushing us to invent or perish. Even social patterns repeat like controlled trials. Cooperation, competition, inequality, innovation. They appear in every civilization, as though some unseen hand is running the same experiment with different variables to see whether the outcomes change. And if Earth is a laboratory, then the experiment doesn't look like it has a single endpoint. It is not simply about producing one perfect species or one stable society. It seems to be about observing the range of possibilities. Life has been tested under extremes of heat, cold, abundance, and scarcity. It has been tested through asteroids and ice ages, through cooperation and war. What seems random might actually be the richness of the experiment. It makes you wonder about our role. Are we the final stage, the ultimate test subjects, or simply one more iteration in a series that will continue long after us? Perhaps humanity is just another trial, like the dinosaurs were, to see what intelligence does under pressure. Or perhaps we are the beginning of a new phase, where the experiment shifts from simple survival to something deeper. Morality, cooperation, self-awareness. If you think about it, the laboratory metaphor also changes how we see failure. In a lab, failure isn't meaningless. Every failed attempt provides data, points the way toward new questions. Maybe the same is true for life on Earth. Extinctions, collapses, mistakes. They all feed into the larger experiment. Nothing is wasted. Everything is recorded, even if we don't know by whom. And that's the part that lingers. Who is the observer? Is it advanced extraterrestrials? patient and methodical, running long-term trials on different planets? Is it future humans, studying their own past through simulations? Is it a higher intelligence setting conditions not out of indifference but out of curiosity or even hope? We can't answer that, not yet. But the pattern remains, the Earth itself carrying the marks of a world designed for endless testing. So when you look at the stars, or even just the ground beneath your feet, you might see more than scenery. You might see the floor of a laboratory, the surface of a test field. Every creature, every storm, every quiet human thought, becoming one more data point in the longest-running experiment we can imagine. When people talk about extinction, the word usually arrives heavy. It carries with it the sense of loss, of something precious slipping into silence forever. But if we allow ourselves to place the thought of Earth as a test field over this history, extinction begins to look slightly different. It stops being just an ending and starts to resemble a kind of reset. Not random catastrophe, but a button pressed at key intervals, wiping the slate in order to see what comes next. Think of the dinosaurs. For more than 150 million years they dominated the planet. Vast, diverse, adaptable, they filled the Earth with every imaginable form, from armoured giants to feathered predators. By all accounts, they were successful. Then, around 65 million years ago, an asteroid struck. In geological time, it was an instant, a sudden trial that most of them failed. If this was an experiment, then that asteroid looks like the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Their disappearance opened space for mammals and eventually for us. It was not just destruction, it was transition, and it wasn't the first reset. Far earlier, about 250 million years ago, the Permian extinction wiped out 90% of all marine life and 70% of land species. So thorough was the reset that it has been called the Great Dying. For millions of years afterward, life seemed diminished, quiet, slow to recover, but eventually new forms emerged, stronger and more complex, filling the empty ecological spaces. The planet, once cleared, became fertile ground for experimentation again. Scientists catalogue at least 5 major mass extinctions, along with countless smaller ones. Each follows a pattern, a world rich with life suddenly disrupted by some massive event, an asteroid, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts. The majority of species vanish, and new ones rise in their place. If life were purely random, these events would be tragedies without meaning. But if Earth is a test field, they might be deliberate pauses, scheduled resets in an ongoing sequence. Not cruelty, but calibration. The test changes conditions, and observers wait to see how life adapts. Even the smaller extinctions carry the flavour of resets. Take the end of the Ice Age roughly 12,000 years ago. Megafauna, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, disappeared as the climate warmed and humans expanded. Their absence reshaped ecosystems and forced humanity to innovate, turning from hunting massive beasts to domesticating crops and animals. Civilization, in a sense, was born out of that reset. Without it, human society might never have taken the path it did. From this perspective, mass extinctions aren't simply accidents of nature. They are turning points. The test shifts the parameters, closes one chapter, and opens another. And always the question seems to be, what emerges now? Will the survivors find ways to adapt, to diversify, to create something new? It's unsettling to think that catastrophe might serve a purpose. No one wants to imagine disaster as intentional. Yet if this is a test field, then the harshness of extinction isn't cruelty, but method. A scientist does not weep when one trial ends. They record the data and begin again. Life, endlessly resilient, has responded each time with renewal. Perhaps that resilience is what is being measured. But there's another angle to consider. If resets are part of the design, then the experiment is not about perfection, but persistence. No species lasts forever, No empire stands eternally. The point is not to preserve, but to test under change. Extinction becomes the ultimate question. When the rules are rewritten, who can continue the game? And if that's true, then humanity's survival is not guaranteed. We face our own possible resets: climate change, nuclear war, pandemics, environmental collapse. We may think of them as avoidable disasters, but they might also be the next scheduled test. A challenge designed to measure whether we can respond with wisdom, cooperation, and adaptation, or whether we too will pass into history, leaving room for something else. Still, even in the darkest resets, life has never failed completely. Not once has the Earth been emptied. Something always survives. Bacteria in the deep sea, small mammals in burrows, seeds hidden in soil. Life has a way of enduring, of seizing even the tiniest foothold. If the test has a single consistent result, it is that persistence never disappears. And maybe that's the most important outcome of all. So when we look back at mass extinctions, we can see them not just as pages torn from the book of life, but as punctuation. Full stops followed by new sentences, each asking the same quiet question: what will you do now? Evolution is usually described as a natural process, slow, steady, shaped by chance. Tiny genetic changes arise, most fade away, some give an advantage, and those advantages spread. Survival of the fittest, as the phrase goes. But when you tilt your head and look at it through the lens of a test field, evolution begins to take on another character. It stops feeling like a blind accident and starts resembling trial after trial, error after error, a series of ongoing experiments in what life can become. Think about how it began. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth held nothing more than microbes, single-celled organisms drifting in seas, patient, repetitive, almost monotonous. Yet even here, the groundwork was being laid. Cells experimented with photosynthesis, with respiration, with cooperation. Some learned to clump together, forming colonies, as though life were trying out teamwork for the first time. Then, slowly, multicellular organisms appeared, like the test had moved to its next phase. What happens when life is no longer just one cell, but many, working together? The Cambrian explosion, about 540 million years ago, feels almost theatrical in this context. Suddenly, in a relatively short span of time, life diversified into countless body plans, shells, spines, eyes, limbs. It was as if someone had opened the door to the lab and said, "All right, let's see what happens when we allow every possibility at once." Many of those early designs vanished quickly, but some endured and became the templates for almost every major group of animals alive today. Trial, error, survival. And notice the pattern that keeps returning. Experiments aren't always efficient. Countless species thrive for a while and then disappear. Dead ends, you could say. But in a test field, dead ends are valuable. They show what works only temporarily, what collapses under pressure, what fails to adapt. Success is visible in survival, but failure is data too. The dinosaurs succeeded brilliantly until they didn't. Trilobites covered the seas for millions of years before vanishing. Each story adds to the record of what life can and cannot do. Humans too are wrapped inside this puzzle. Our evolutionary path is filled with experiments. Different hominin species appeared: Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans. Most disappeared. Only one line survived long enough to become us. Why? Maybe it was intelligence. Maybe it was cooperation. Maybe it was simply luck. But in a test field perspective, it was the outcome of many trials. Humanity was not inevitable. We were one of many experiments, one of many possibilities. And even within our own story, trial and error continues. Cultures rise, experiment with ways of living, collapse and vanish. Languages form, spread, disappear. Religions, governments, economies, each is an experiment in survival and adaptation, tested under changing conditions. Some endure, others fall, and the test continues. But the puzzle deepens when you notice how evolution seems to push toward complexity. Single cells became multicellular organisms. Simple nervous systems became brains. Basic communication became language. Not every path leads upward, but the overall trend suggests direction toward intelligence, toward self-awareness, toward creatures capable of asking whether they are being tested. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe it's the underlying goal of the experiment, to see whether life can evolve not just to survive, but to reflect on survival. There's also the way cooperation emerges alongside competition. Evolution is often painted as a ruthless struggle, but survival often depends on partnership. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, were once separate organisms, absorbed long ago in a symbiotic relationship. Pollinators and plants, coral and algae, predators and scavengers, life experiments not only with competition but with collaboration. In a test field, that looks like another variable. When does cooperation work better than rivalry? And then there's extinction again, woven into the puzzle. Each mass wipeout seems cruel until you see how it clears space for new trials. When dominant species fall, new possibilities open. After the dinosaurs, mammals. After the Permian extinction, reptiles and amphibians. Resets, followed by experiments, followed by survival. So what is the puzzle pointing to? Is it leading to some final result? Or is the ongoing process the point itself? Maybe the experiment doesn't aim for one perfect species, but for diversity. Maybe the value lies in the sheer range of what life has tried, from jellyfish to giraffes, from moss to redwoods, from microbes in volcanic vents to humans building space telescopes. Maybe the richness itself is the answer the test seeks, but humans, again, complicate things. We not only evolve, we interfere with evolution. We domesticate plants and animals, edit genes, design machines that may one day replace us. We accelerate the process, adding our own layer of experiments on top of nature's. Perhaps this is another phase of the test. What happens when the subjects learn to run experiments of their own? And maybe that's the most puzzling piece of all. Evolution gave us curiosity, and curiosity makes us ask questions like this one. We look at our own history, we see trial, error, and survival, and we wonder if someone else is watching too. Maybe curiosity is the latest adaptation being tested. Will it lead us to wisdom, or will it lead us to ruin? The answer isn't clear yet, but the puzzle remains, unfolding with every generation. If you step back and look at human history not as a straight line, but as a series of waves, something curious emerges. Civilizations don't simply last forever. They rise with energy, inventiveness, and ambition, and then, sometimes abruptly, they vanish. From one perspective it's tragic, from another it's just the rhythm of human affairs. But if Earth is a test field, then maybe each civilization is less a permanent achievement and more a trial run, a test to see what happens under certain conditions, with certain resources, with certain cultural choices. Think about Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization. In the fertile valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people learned to farm, to build cities, to write. Here we see the first experiments with organized government, laws and trade networks stretching across vast distances. It flourished, and then it faltered. Salinized soil, invasions, political instability. Was it failure, or was it the end of one trial? The results recorded before the next run began. Egypt rose on the banks of the Nile with astonishing stability. For thousands of years, dynasties ruled, monuments rose, and knowledge accumulated. Yet even Egypt declined. Droughts weakened agriculture, outside powers invaded, internal corruption spread. The trial of centralized stability gave way to collapse. Then look east to the Indus Valley, where cities like Mohenjo-Daro thrived with advanced sanitation, planned streets, and standardized weights. Yet for reasons still debated, perhaps climate shifts, perhaps changing rivers, the civilization vanished. No dramatic conquest, just a quiet ending. Another test concluded, another data point added. The same story plays out across the world. The Maya built soaring temples and tracked the heavens with remarkable precision. Then their cities were abandoned, perhaps due to drought, resource depletion, or internal conflict. The Roman Empire stretched across continents, binding diverse peoples with roads, laws, and military might, only to crumble under the weight of overexpansion, corruption, and pressure from outside tribes. Each case looks like a pattern: rise, flourish, decline, test, record, reset. From this angle, it isn't failure that defines civilizations, but impermanence. None of them were meant to last forever. Perhaps permanence isn't the goal. Maybe the experiment is about observing what happens at each stage, how people govern, how they distribute resources, how they handle power, how they respond to scarcity and abundance. And the variety is striking. Some civilizations emphasize rigid hierarchy, others relative equality. Some value conquest, others stability. Some collapse quickly, others linger for centuries. The outcomes differ, but the pattern of rise and fall repeats. It is as though the test is running the same scenario with different variables. What happens when you give people fertile land but little metal? What happens when you give them seafaring skills but scattered islands? What happens when you give them iron or gunpowder or printing presses? And notice what remains after each collapse. Not nothing, but fragments, knowledge, influence that shapes the next trial. Mesopotamian writing influenced later scripts. Roman engineering shaped Europe for centuries. Mayan mathematics still echoes in modern calendars. The experiment doesn't erase everything. It leaves traces as though the results are cumulative, building towards something greater. Today, when we look at our global civilization, interconnected, technologically advanced yet fragile, it's tempting to think we are the final stage. But history suggests otherwise. We might simply be the latest test run, larger in scale, more complex in tools, but still subject to the same rise and fall. The conditions may have changed, but the pattern remains. So the question becomes, is the test looking for one civilization that endures, or is the process itself the point? Are the repeated rises and collapses the desired outcome, showing what happens under endless variations? Or is there a final exam waiting, one that asks whether humanity can at last break the cycle and build something that doesn't vanish? And if we are in that exam now, then our choices matter more than we realise. Climate change, nuclear weapons, global inequality, pandemics. These might be the conditions of our trial, designed to reveal whether we can learn from the test runs of the past. Will we collapse like those before us, or will we adapt, cooperate, and continue? Civilizations, then, are not just stories of power and decline. They are experiments. Each one rises, each one vanishes, each one leaves results behind. And when seen as part of a test field, their impermanence becomes less of a tragedy and more of a method. The experiment continues, the data accumulates, and the observers, whoever they may be, wait to see what humanity does next. When we look at nature, we usually treat its rules as neutral. Physics, chemistry, biology. They're the framework, the given conditions in which everything happens. But if Earth is a test field, then those very rules take on a new kind of meaning. They stop being simple background and start looking like parameters, carefully set by someone who wanted to see what would emerge. Think about gravity. It pulls objects together, gives weight to our steps, keeps the atmosphere clinging to the planet. Change it slightly, and nothing would be the same. Too weak, and air and water drift away into space. Too strong, and organisms might never grow large, flight might be impossible, even metabolism could be restricted. It feels less like coincidence and more like calibration, a dial turned to just the right setting. Then there's water, the strangest liquid in the universe. It expands when it freezes, unlike most substances, which is why ice floats. Without that odd quirk, oceans and lakes would freeze from the bottom up, trapping life beneath layers of ice until nothing remained. Instead, ice floats, insulating the liquid below, preserving ecosystems during winters. Survival continues because one simple rule was bent in just the right way: accident or design, or take DNM, the code of life. 4 bases, repeating endlessly in different patterns. It's efficient, flexible, stable, and yet capable of mutation. Why 4 bases? Why not 2 or 6? Enough to allow complexity, not so many that the code becomes unstable. If Earth is a test field, DNA might be the universal programming language chosen for its balance between order and variability. The same strangeness appears in ecosystems. Predator and prey are locked in balance. Too many predators, and prey vanish, collapsing the system. Too few and prey overpopulate, destroying food sources. Ecosystems stabilize around invisible tipping points, as though designed to maintain tension without snapping completely. It's like a rule written into the test. Allow fluctuation, but prevent absolute collapse, at least most of the time. And notice how nature insists on limits. Every organism has needs it cannot escape. Energy must come from somewhere. Waste must be dealt with. Death is inevitable. These constraints keep the system moving, prevent stagnation. You could imagine a universe where organisms were immortal, never hungry, never vulnerable. But what would such a test measure? By writing mortality into the rules, the experiment guarantees change, struggle, and adaptation. Even beauty, strangely enough, fits the pattern. Flowers evolve bright colours to attract pollinators. Birds sing elaborate songs to attract mates. Peacocks grow feathers that seem almost impractical. Beauty might be useful, but it also feels unnecessary, extravagant. In a test field, it could be a variable. What happens when creatures are influenced not just by survival but by attraction, aesthetics, even something like preference? Then there's the rule of balance between cooperation and competition. Nature doesn't favour one completely. Wolves hunt together, bees work as colonies, humans build societies. Yet at the same time, individuals compete for resources, mates, and territory. Too much competition and everything collapses. Too much cooperation and innovation stalls. It's as if the test requires both, weaving them together to see what results emerge. Sometimes the rules even look deliberately paradoxical. Viruses, for example, are on the edge of life, not fully alive, not fully dead. They spread relentlessly, often devastating, yet they also shape evolution by forcing adaptations, by carrying genetic material between organisms. Why create something so destructive and so useful at once? Unless the point was to see how life handles contradictions. And of course, humans notice the rules most clearly when they bend them. Antibiotics kill bacteria but trigger resistance. Fertilizers feed crops but exhaust soil. Technology solves one problem and creates another. It's as if the rules have built-in consequences, reminding us that shortcuts carry costs. So the question lingers: are these strange rules the result of blind chance, or are they parameters in a vast experiment? Gravity, water, DNA, ecosystems, mortality, beauty, balance, paradox. They could be natural accidents, or they could be carefully chosen conditions. If they are chosen, then the test is elegant. The rules aren't rigid, but flexible enough to allow diversity. They don't dictate outcomes, they only shape possibilities. Within those boundaries, life experiments endlessly. Trial, error, survival. And we, humans, are just the latest creatures to ask why the rules are what they are. Suffering is one of those things we struggle to explain no matter what lens we use. Religions wrestle with it. Philosophy circles around it. Science often sidesteps it, and each individual who goes through it feels the weight directly. Why is there so much pain built into existence? Not just the obvious forms like disease or disaster, but the quiet, everyday kinds too. Loneliness, regret, grief, disappointment. If Earth is a test field, suffering begins to look less like a flaw and more like an intentional part of the conditions, a variable designed into the experiment itself. Look first at physical suffering. Bodies are fragile, vulnerable to injury, illness, decay. Bones break, skin burns, organs fail. It seems cruel at first glance. Why not make beings more durable? But maybe fragility is part of the test. Resilience can only be revealed under strain. Compassion only appears when there is someone to care for. Medicine only advances when disease demands it. In this way, suffering generates responses, endurance, innovation, empathy. Without suffering, those responses would never be tested. Then there is emotional suffering, which often cuts deeper than the physical. Loss, betrayal, fear, despair. Why give conscious beings emotions strong enough to break them? In a test field, emotions might be another variable. Joy reveals how we flourish when conditions are good. Grief reveals how we recover when conditions are terrible. Love reveals how deeply we can connect, but also how deeply we can hurt. Perhaps the measure is not simply whether we survive, but how we carry ourselves through pain, how we choose to act when faced with it. Consider too how suffering shapes civilizations. Famine pushes societies to invent agriculture. Plagues force improvements in hygiene and medicine. War drives technological leaps, however grimly. Natural disasters teach us to cooperate, to build stronger, to respect the power of the world around us. Entire chapters of human progress are written in response to suffering. If Earth is a test field, those moments of trial might be the points of greatest observation. How do humans respond when the pressure is at its highest? And suffering has another role. It equalizes. Wealth, power, intelligence. None of these guarantee freedom from pain. Even the strongest are vulnerable to loss. Even the richest cannot buy immortality. Suffering makes every life finite, every choice fragile. Perhaps that universality is deliberate, a way of ensuring that every subject in the test, no matter their status, must confront the same core question: how will you face what hurts? But the hardest part of suffering is its seeming unfairness. Innocent children get sick, disasters strike without warning, good people suffer while cruel ones thrive. If this is a test field, then fairness may not be the point. Tests aren't always fair in the moment. They're designed to reveal something about the subjects. Randomness might itself be the variable. What happens when good and bad are not distributed evenly? Do people lose hope, or do they build systems of justice and compassion to counterbalance the unfairness they see? There's also the paradox that suffering often creates meaning. Ask people what shaped them most, and many will point to hardships, loss that deepened their empathy, struggle that built their strength, failure that redirected their lives. No one seeks suffering, yet its presence often becomes the turning point. In a test field, that could be exactly the point. Not that suffering is good in itself, but that the responses it triggers reveal something essential. Even art and culture bear this out. So much of what humans create, music, literature, painting, film, is an attempt to process pain, tragedies, heartbreak songs, stories of resilience. Our creativity is fueled as much by what hurts as by what delights. In that sense, suffering expands not only survival skills but imagination. Still, none of this makes suffering easy to accept. Knowing it might be part of a test doesn't make the pain lighter in the moment. But it does frame it differently. Instead of seeing suffering as pointless, you can see it as a condition that shapes the experiment, as something woven into the very fabric of the test. And maybe that's the deeper layer. If Earth is a test field, suffering is not punishment. It is observation. It's the background pressure against which life reveals its truest colours. Not whether we avoid pain, because we can't, but how we respond to it. Do we collapse into cruelty, or do we reach for kindness? Do we turn inward, or do we connect outward? Those responses may be the real data the test is recording. So the next time you ask why suffering exists, consider that in a world designed for testing, it might be the most important variable of all. Not because it is good, not because it is fair, but because it reveals what nothing else can. Once the thought takes hold that Earth may be more than an accident, another question follows naturally, almost uncomfortably. If it isn't random, then who is watching? Who could possibly have the scale, the patience, the power to set up a planet as a test field and then wait across millions of years for the results? It's a question that makes people uneasy, because it forces us to look beyond what we know and into possibilities that are strange, maybe even unsettling. The first candidates that come to mind are the ones our stories have always played with: extraterrestrials. Civilizations older and wiser than ours, born long before the Earth had even cooled. They might have mastered technologies that let them seed life across worlds, set conditions like scientists arranging a lab, and then step back. We imagine them in spaceships or with forms so alien we could barely comprehend them, but maybe they don't need to arrive in ships at all. Maybe their methods are woven into the physics of the universe itself, subtle enough that what we call natural laws are actually the framework they left behind. But aliens aren't the only option. Another possibility is that the Watchers are us, or at least a version of us from the far future. Humanity has already begun running simulations of climate, disease, and economics. Scale that forward by 1,000 years, and it's not impossible to imagine our descendants running simulations of entire planets, entire histories. Maybe they wanted to see what choices their ancestors might make under certain conditions. Maybe they wanted to understand how civilizations rise and fall, or how intelligence responds to crisis. In that case, we're part of a project. Not out of malice, but out of curiosity. Like a child running a model train set, only on a scale beyond our comprehension. Then there is the possibility of something higher, something that doesn't fit into our categories of alien or human. Call it intelligence, consciousness, God, or something else entirely. Maybe it isn't a being in the way we think of beings, but a kind of mind woven into reality itself. In that case, the Watchers are not separate from the universe. They are the universe, testing itself through life. Each option carries its own implications. If aliens are watching, then we are part of someone else's research, valuable only for the data we provide. If future humans are watching, then we are echoes, test subjects in a vast simulation designed for learning, maybe even entertainment. If a higher intelligence is watching, then perhaps the test has moral or spiritual meaning, not just scientific curiosity. And of course, there's the unsettling thought that maybe no one is watching at all, and the experiment is automated. Imagine a test set in motion long ago, designed to run without intervention, gathering results endlessly without a direct observer. The Watchers might not be here anymore, or maybe they never needed to be. Still, the question won't go away. If the conditions of Earth are so precise, so strangely balanced, it feels as though someone, or something, must be keeping track. The sheer scale of time, the way resets come at intervals, the way evolution seems to push toward intelligence, all of it hints at design. But if someone is watching, why the silence? Why no messages, no signs, no clear evidence? Perhaps because the point of a test is not to interfere. Scientists don't guide their subjects towards success. They observe what happens naturally. Silence might not mean absence, it might mean restraint. Maybe the Watchers are waiting to see how we respond without help, whether we can figure things out on our own. And here's the thought that lingers. Maybe the Watchers aren't distant at all. Maybe they are close, woven into the patterns of life itself, appearing not in obvious ways but in subtle nudges. A mutation here, a coincidence there, a strange alignment of events that push us towards certain outcomes. Who could be watching? Aliens, future humans, higher intelligence, automated systems, or something else beyond imagination? The truth is, we don't know. But if Earth is a test field, then someone, or something, is out there, curious enough to set the stage and patient enough to wait for the story to unfold. When most people hear the phrase advanced extraterrestrials, their minds leap to the familiar images pop culture has given us. Tall beings with enormous dark eyes, glowing ships hovering silently over cities, green skin, silver suits, strange voices. But if we step away from the cliches for a moment and take the idea seriously, if Earth really is a test field, and if someone is running it, then advanced extraterrestrials are one of the most straightforward candidates. Consider the timescale. Our own civilization has gone from fire to smartphones in a few tens of thousands of years, barely a blink in cosmic time. Imagine a species with a head start of millions of years, even billions. What would their technology look like? What would their intentions be? If we can already edit genes, simulate weather, and build artificial intelligence, what could they do with 1 million more years of progress? Perhaps seeding life across planets is routine for them, like planting gardens. They might carry the raw ingredients, amino acids, microbes, DNA like templates, and scatter them through star systems. Earth, in this view, wasn't random, but chosen. Its conditions were right, so they placed the seeds, arranged the soil, set the experiment running. And if they are watching, they would not need to hover in ships. Interference would spoil the test. Instead, they might use tools so subtle we mistake them for natural processes. Asteroids that redirect the course of evolution, climate fluctuations that push species to adapt, bursts of mutation that accelerate change. All of these could be nudges, adjustments by an intelligence far beyond us. Even the silence might make sense. We expect aliens to announce themselves with messages, signals, visits. But if Earth is a test field, the last thing they would do is reveal the experiment. Silence isn't absence. Silence is control. Scientists don't speak to their test subjects, they watch. Think too about scale. Advanced extraterrestrials might not care only about us. They could be running thousands of test fields across the galaxy, each one a planet with its own conditions, some with high gravity, some with 2 suns, some with different chemistry. Each one another trial, another piece of data. Earth may feel unique to us, but to them it might be one of many. And what would they be testing? Perhaps resilience, how life adapts under pressure. Perhaps morality, how intelligence balances selfishness with cooperation. Perhaps creativity, how far a species can push against its own limits. Or maybe it isn't about any single trait. Maybe the test is simply to watch life unfold, to see the sheer variety of what is possible when the right conditions are set. Of course, there's a darker angle. What if advanced extraterrestrials aren't benevolent gardeners, but indifferent scientists? To them, our lives might not matter individually. We are data points, not children. Extinction might be no more significant than the end of a lab trial. Comforting or terrifying, depending on how you see it. But another possibility is more hopeful. What if they are not indifferent at all? What if they are invested, hoping to see us succeed? Maybe the test isn't about collecting data, but about preparation. Maybe we are being shaped for eventual contact, tested to see whether we can handle the truth of other civilizations. Maybe the silence is not rejection, but patience, waiting until we are ready. And here we sit telling stories about them, building films and books filled with their imagined forms. Perhaps that too is part of the test. Our curiosity about life beyond Earth might be one of the very qualities they are watching. Because curiosity leads to exploration, exploration to discovery, discovery to growth. So the idea of advanced extraterrestrials as the watchers behind the test field is not as far-fetched as it sounds. If life on Earth has always been shaped, nudged, observed, then it fits neatly into the scenario. It doesn't prove it, of course, but it leaves us with a question worth sitting with. If they are out there, and if they are watching, what kind of story do they think we're telling right now? Imagine for a moment that the watchers aren't aliens at all. Imagine instead that they're us, not as in the present, but as in the far future. Humanity 1,000 years from now, maybe 10,000, maybe even 1,000,000. What would we look like by then? What would we know? What would we be capable of? Today we already run simulations. We model climate systems to see how the Earth will change. We simulate disease outbreaks to test responses. We build digital replicas of traffic, of economies, of entire ecosystems. These simulations are still crude, limited by our computing power. But give us another century, another millennium. It's not hard to picture us creating simulations so detailed they feel indistinguishable from reality. If that's possible, then maybe that's what we are. Maybe Earth is not a random planet, but a test designed by our own descendants. They might have wanted to understand their origins, to see how we lived before they became what they are. Or maybe they wanted to study the patterns of civilizations, the choices we made, the mistakes we repeated. What better way to learn than to recreate the past, not as a book or a record, but as a living, breathing world? In that case, our lives are part of a simulation. Not faked, not unreal, but running on a system we can't see. Every joy, every sorrow, every rise and fall of empire, all part of an experiment designed by humans so far ahead of us we could hardly recognize them as kin. There's an unsettling symmetry here. We run experiments on animals, on cells, on computer programs. What if our descendants simply do the same, but on a larger scale? We are their lab mice, their test data, their history lesson. To them, our suffering might not be cruelty, but curiosity. Not punishment, but process. And the silence of the universe would make sense here too. If we're inside their simulation, of course we don't hear signals from the outside. Of course we don't see beyond the edges. Everything is contained, because everything is designed. But what if it isn't just about studying the past? What if the future humans are using this test field to explore possibilities? Not just what did happen, but what could have happened. Maybe there are countless versions of Earth running in parallel, each with slight differences. In one, the asteroid misses the dinosaurs. In another, the Roman Empire never falls. In another, humanity never invents electricity. Each scenario is a test, a way of mapping the branching paths of history. And maybe that explains the sense we sometimes get that life is strangely coincidental, that small events carry disproportionate weight. In one test run, a single choice could shift the future dramatically. Future humans might be watching closely, noting how one decision in one moment changes the trajectory of the whole world. There's even a possibility that the experiment is not external at all, but participatory. Maybe future humans are not only watching but entering their simulations, living among us to feel what it was like, slipping into roles hidden unnoticed, testing not just outcomes but experiences. In that case, the watchers may walk beside us every day without us ever knowing. The question then becomes, why? Why would future humans put so much effort into testing their past? Maybe it's for knowledge. Maybe it's for entertainment. Maybe it's for survival, to understand the challenges that shaped them so they can face their own future more wisely. Or maybe, in some strange way, they are trying to give meaning back to us. By recreating our lives as an experiment, they preserve us, ensure that we are never forgotten, that every choice we made continues to matter. And if that's true, then everything we do, every small kindness, every mistake, every invention, is not lost to time, but recorded. Not for gods, not for aliens, but for our own descendants who wanted to see what it meant to be human before they became something else. It's a dizzying thought, unsettling but strangely comforting too, because if the Watchers are future humans, then we are not alone and we are not meaningless. We are part of their story, just as they are the continuation of ours. When people speak about Watchers, about who could be behind the setup of a test field like Earth, the mind often runs first to aliens or to our own descendants. But there's another possibility that sits deeper, heavier, more difficult to wrap language around. What if it isn't beings like us at all? Not even distant cousins in another star system or upgraded versions of ourselves? What if it is something higher? Not higher as in taller or stronger, but higher in the sense of order, scope, and consciousness. Something we might call intelligence, or architects, or even gods, though each of those words feels too small for what the idea suggests. Imagine that reality itself has layers, and at the layer above ours there are entities whose role is not to live inside the world, but to design it. Cosmic architects who set the constants of physics like an engineer sets the rules of a machine. They choose the strength of gravity, the speed of light, the charge of the electron, and from those numbers everything else unfolds. If Earth feels tuned for life, balanced so precisely that it almost seems deliberate, maybe that is because it was. Not by accident, not by blind luck, but by choice. These architects wouldn't need ships or laboratories in the way we imagine. Their canvas would be space-time itself. Their tools, the laws of nature, their medium, the unfolding of billions of years. To them, running a test on life might be no more difficult than for us running a simulation on a laptop. They would create universes the way we create models, adjusting variables, watching the results. In that picture, Earth is one test among many. Not the only one, not even necessarily the most important. Just one design in a vast project of exploration. Some universes collapse quickly, some remain empty, some produce only simple matter. Ours happens to be one where complexity thrives, where life blooms, where intelligence rises to ask who made the rules. The difficulty is that if such architects exist, their motives are unknowable. We design experiments for many reasons, to learn, to prove, to create, sometimes even just out of curiosity. Maybe they do the same. Perhaps they wonder what forms consciousness can take, what moral choices arise, what civilizations build and destroy. Maybe the test isn't for us at all, but for them. A way of studying possibilities. Or perhaps there is purpose beyond curiosity. Maybe the architects are shaping us, not just observing. Maybe they are guiding life slowly, subtly, towards something. Morality, cooperation, awareness. Maybe every reset, every extinction, every collapse has been part of that guidance. Not punishment, not accident, but design, nudging us toward lessons we don't yet understand. And here the question grows heavier. Are these higher intelligences benevolent? Do they care whether we succeed, whether we suffer, whether we survive? Or are they detached, watching with interest but without compassion? To a scientist studying bacteria, the fate of individual cells is irrelevant. But to the bacteria, every moment is life or death. The gap between us and them might be as wide as the gap between bacteria and us. Still, some part of us hopes they do care. Maybe that hope is itself part of the test. To see whether creatures in a difficult world will invent meaning, will reach for connection beyond what they can see. Maybe the very act of imagining higher intelligence is one of the things they want to observe. The idea of cosmic architects also explains the silence of the universe in another way. Perhaps we'll never hear from aliens because the intelligence that matters is not inside the universe with us. It is outside, beyond, holding the frame itself. No signal would come because no signal is needed. The rules themselves are the message. So what do we call them? Gods, programmers, designers. The words don't matter as much as the possibility that what we live inside is not random, not chaotic, but crafted. And if it was crafted, then our lives are not accidents. They are part of an experiment designed by minds so vast we can barely begin to picture them. If we let ourselves sit with the possibility that Earth is a test field, then another thought rises almost immediately. If this is a test, then what are the criteria? What are we being measured against? What matters to whoever set this experiment in motion? One obvious candidate is survival. Life is fragile, constantly under threat from disease, disaster and scarcity. Yet again and again, species find ways to adapt. Dinosaurs vanish, mammals rise, ice ages come, humanity invents clothing, fire and shelter. Plagues strike, medicine advances. Survival might be the baseline score, the most fundamental metric. Can life persist under pressure? Can it recover from resets? Can it continue? But survival alone feels too simple. If endurance was the only measure, cockroaches would be the highest scoring species on the planet. So maybe the criteria reach further. Maybe intelligence is one of them. Not just the ability to survive, but to understand. Humans asking questions, building tools, peering into the universe with telescopes. Maybe this is exactly the kind of response the test is meant to reveal. Then again, intelligence without morality can be dangerous. We invent fire and burn forests. We split the atom and build weapons. Perhaps the Watchers aren't only interested in whether we can think, but in how we choose to use our thinking. Maybe compassion, cooperation, restraint are part of the scorecard. How do intelligent beings handle power? Do they dominate or do they care? Another possible criterion could be creativity. Nature already experiments endlessly, but humans add something new: art, music, stories. We take survival and weave meaning into it. We imagine gods, aliens, architects, tests. If this is a test field, maybe imagination itself is a sign of progress. Maybe the ability to see beyond what is directly in front of us is part of what's being measured. And then there's resilience, not just physical, but emotional. How do we respond when things fall apart? Do we turn on each other, or do we rebuild? Do we sink into despair, or do we create hope out of nothing? Resilience may be less about what happens to us, and more about what we do afterward. There's also the possibility that morality itself is the key. Maybe the hidden criteria are not about technology or endurance at all, but about choices. Will we create justice in a world that isn't fair? Will we share when it's easier to hoard? Will we help the vulnerable when we gain nothing from it? Maybe the test is moral in nature, not scientific. But what if the criteria aren't even consistent? Maybe different civilizations, different species, different times are tested for different things. One trial might emphasize endurance, another cooperation, another creativity. The data would be in the variety, not in one standard score. And of course, there's the possibility that we're not meant to know the criteria at all. In most experiments, the subjects don't know what's being measured. That would distort the results. Maybe our confusion, our endless guessing about meaning is part of the test. Maybe the way we respond to uncertainty itself is what matters. If that's true, then the hidden criteria are less about outcomes and more about process. Not whether we survive forever, but how we live while we do. Not whether we discover absolute truth, but whether we search for it. Not whether we eliminate suffering, but how we treat each other in the face of it. And here's the haunting possibility. Maybe the criteria aren't hidden from us at all. Maybe we've always known. Survival, intelligence, compassion, creativity, resilience, morality. These are the values we celebrate in our stories, the qualities we admire in heroes, the ideals we pass down in culture. Maybe the test field doesn't need to hide the criteria because we've been carrying them inside us all along. If Earth is a test field, then the question of free will becomes impossible to ignore. Because a test implies structure, parameters, conditions set in advance. It implies that someone, somewhere, arranged the maze before we ever stepped into it. And if that's the case, then how much of what we do is really our own choice? Are we explorers carving paths, or just subjects following corridors already laid down? Look at the world around you. Gravity pulls you down whether you want it to or not. You need food, water, air, sleep. You can't live without them. Your body will age, your cells will wear down, you will die. Those aren't choices, they're conditions. And yet within them, an enormous range of possibilities unfolds. You can choose what to eat, when to sleep, how to spend your days, what to create, who to love. Limits on one side, freedom on the other. If this is a laboratory, then maybe that's the point. The walls are fixed, but the paths inside are open. A mouse in a maze doesn't choose the maze, but it does choose how to move within it. And those movements, those choices, are exactly what the observer wants to see. Not because there's a single right answer, but because the way choices are made reveals what kind of creature is being tested. That might explain why life feels both constrained and open at once. The rules of physics don't bend for us. The conditions of nature don't shift at our will. Yet within them, humans create music, build cities, invent philosophies, wage wars, fall in love. Free will may not be absolute freedom, but freedom within boundaries. And perhaps that's what the test is about. Not whether we can escape the laboratory, but how we live inside it. Do we cooperate or compete? Do we destroy or nurture? Do we accept limits or try to push them? Each choice becomes a kind of data point. Still, the question of whether our choices are real nags at us. Neuroscience shows that many decisions are made in the brain milliseconds before we're even aware of them. Psychology shows how much of our behaviour is shaped by conditioning, by environment, by unconscious bias. History shows how individuals are swept up in forces far larger than themselves. Economies, climates, empires. Are we really free, or are we reacting to conditions too big to escape? But maybe that's another layer of the test. Freedom doesn't have to be infinite to be meaningful. The fact that conditions shape us doesn't erase the significance of how we respond within them. A tree grows according to soil and sunlight, yet each tree takes a unique shape. Perhaps human lives are like that, constrained but still expressive. And if the test is meant to measure moral or creative qualities, then total freedom wouldn't even make sense. What would generosity mean if there were no scarcity? What would courage mean if there were no danger? What would love mean if we could never lose? The limits and the pain may be the very things that make choice matter. Of course, there's a darker angle. If the laboratory is too controlled, then free will might be an illusion altogether. Maybe every rise and fall of civilization, every extinction, every invention was inevitable, predetermined by the setup. In that case, we're not subjects making choices, but actors following a script, convinced of our freedom only because the script demands it. Yet even then, something in us resists that thought. We feel free. We argue, decide, regret, hope. Even if the experiment is scripted, the experience of choice is real to us. And perhaps that too is part of the test. To see how creatures behave when given the sense of freedom, whether or not it is absolute. So free will in a laboratory world might not be about whether we can break the rules, but about what we do within them. The walls are there, the conditions fixed. But inside the maze, inside the test field, there are countless ways to move. And every one of those movements, every one of those choices, says something about who we are. If Earth is a test field, then what exactly are we inside it? Are we subjects in an experiment, like lab animals whose behaviours are tracked? Are we students meant to learn lessons from the conditions set before us? Or are we nothing more than data points, anonymous entries in some vast record, our individual lives meaningless except as statistics? Start with the most unsettling option, subjects. In this view, we are like mice in a maze, reacting to stimuli, running into dead ends, finding bits of reward. The observer set the environment and simply wait to see what happens. Maybe that's why life feels full of random trials. Disease, famine, disaster, joy, success, failure. We are given conditions and watched as we adapt. Our suffering wouldn't matter to the watchers any more than the distress of a lab rat matters to a scientist. What matters is the result. Do we adapt? Do we persist? Do we fail? But there's another possibility, gentler. Maybe we are students. Maybe the test field isn't about extracting data, but about teaching lessons. In that case, hardship isn't just observation, it's instruction. Every disaster teaches resilience. Every collapse teaches humility. Every moment of compassion teaches connection. The resets, the extinctions, the rises and falls of civilizations, these aren't just outcomes to record, they are lessons to be absorbed. If that's true, then the point is not just to watch us, but to shape us, to see if we grow wiser, kinder, more aware. And then there's the cold, almost mechanical option: data points. In this scenario, our individual lives mean nothing at all. One person's joy, another's grief, entire civilizations, all reduced to numbers in some incomprehensibly vast data set. Patterns matter, not individuals. Like weather stations feeding information into a model, we exist only to contribute to the overall record. From our perspective, life is rich and meaningful. From theirs, it may be only entries in a ledger. But maybe these roles aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe at different levels, we're all three at once. As individuals, we may be subjects, each life an experiment in resilience and choice. As civilizations, we may be students, learning from repeated trials, slowly building towards something greater. And at the broader scale, perhaps we're just data points, our countless struggles and triumphs blending into patterns that only the watchers can see. It's strange, though, how even imagining ourselves as mere data doesn't erase the sense of meaning we feel. If we were only points in a chart, why would we tell stories, create art, search for purpose? Why would we imagine being watched at all? Maybe that drive to find meaning is part of the test. Maybe the experiment isn't only about survival, but about whether conscious beings can create value for themselves even when none is guaranteed. And maybe that's where the distinction lies. If we are subjects, then the point is what the watchers learn from us. If we are students, then the point is what we learn for ourselves. If we are data points, then the point is what the patterns reveal. But in every case, something is revealed. Nothing is wasted. So, which are we? Subjects, students, or data? Perhaps the unsettling answer is that we don't get to choose, but the comforting answer is that maybe it doesn't matter. Because whether we are watched for knowledge, guided for growth, or counted for patterns, our lives still carry weight inside the experiment. Every act of kindness, every invention, every collapse, every survival, all of it contributes to the story. If the idea of Earth as a test field is true, then you can't help but wonder whether the exam is ongoing, or whether something bigger is waiting just ahead. History is full of smaller tests, plagues, wars, collapses, recoveries. But what if there are larger thresholds, moments where humanity as a whole is faced with questions so big they feel final? Are we approaching one of those moments now? Look at the planet around us. The climate is shifting, glaciers retreating, seas rising, weather becoming more violent. Ecosystems are unravelling as species vanish at alarming rates. Resources we once thought endless, forests, water, soil, clean air, are straining under pressure. For much of history, people treated the Earth as unshakable, a stage too vast to alter. Now we're realising we can tilt the whole system off balance. If Earth is a test field, then climate change looks less like an accident and more like a deliberate question. What will you do when your survival depends not on conquering nature, but on caring for it? Technology offers another sign. For thousands of years, our tools grew slowly, step by step. Now they leap forward in decades. nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, space exploration. Each one carries enormous power, the ability to reshape life or destroy it. Maybe that's no coincidence. Maybe the exam is whether intelligence can handle its own inventions without collapsing under their weight. Will we use our tools to heal or to harm, to connect or to control? Then there's our connectedness. Never before has humanity been so aware of itself as a single species. News travels instantly. Pandemics spread globally in weeks. Economies rise and fall in synchrony. What once were local problems now ripple across the planet. In a test field, this could be the merging of smaller trials into a global exam. Can a civilization function not as tribes or nations, but as a planet? Can we act as one when the stakes are shared? You might even see hints in culture. Our stories are filled with apocalyptic themes, visions of collapse, dreams of transcendence. It's as though some part of us already senses the weight of the questions we're facing. We can feel the pressure building, like students aware that the final test is near even before the papers are handed out. Signs of an approaching exam aren't only in crises, though. They're also in opportunities. Renewable energy, global communication, medical breakthroughs, space exploration. These are tools that could carry us through if we choose wisely. Maybe the exam isn't just about surviving dangers, but about recognizing possibilities. Will we rise to meet them or let them slip away? So are we approaching the next exam? It's hard not to feel like we are. The scale of our challenges is larger than ever, the interconnectedness tighter, the consequences sharper. If history has been a series of test runs, then our moment feels like the culmination, the big trial designed to see whether humanity has learned from the past or whether we will repeat the same mistakes on a planetary scale. And perhaps that's why the thought of a test field feels so haunting right now. Because whether or not anyone is watching, the conditions themselves are asking questions. And soon, maybe sooner than we think, our answers will be clear. When you step back and take in the whole idea of Earth as a test field, the biggest question lingers in the air like smoke. Why? If this really is a setup, if conditions were prepared, if resets and trials are part of some larger design, then what is the purpose of the test? What could possibly be worth millions of years of evolution, extinctions, civilizations rising and falling, endless cycles of suffering and survival? One possibility is simple curiosity. If an advanced intelligence, alien or otherwise, created this test, maybe they just wanted to see what would happen. Curiosity drives us to grow crystals in jars, to simulate weather patterns, to observe bacteria under microscopes. Maybe on a cosmic scale, life on Earth is just that. A curiosity project. Not cruel, not benevolent, just curiosity made vast. Another possibility is preparation. Maybe the test is designed to shape us into something ready for contact, or ready for responsibilities we can't imagine yet. If survival alone were the goal, the experiment could have ended with microbes or dinosaurs. But instead, intelligence arose, self-awareness, morality. Perhaps the Watchers are waiting to see if we can rise beyond self-destruction, beyond tribal conflict, beyond short-sightedness. Maybe the test is whether we can grow into something capable of joining a large community of life. Then again, maybe the purpose is not about us at all. Maybe it's about data. Maybe we are one of countless experiments scattered across the galaxy, each testing different conditions. High-gravity planets, low-gravity planets, single-star systems, binary star systems. The point wouldn't be to shape us, but to understand what forms of life are possible. In that scenario, our role is not special. We are one entry among millions in a cosmic catalogue. But there's a more unsettling option too. What if the purpose is entertainment? We already watch reality shows, documentaries, wildlife footage, dramas where people face survival and conflict. Maybe to the Watchers, our lives are stories, watched for interest, drama, even amusement. Our triumphs, our tragedies, our wars and loves and discoveries. Maybe they are the content, not the point. And yet it could be something even deeper. Maybe the purpose of the test is not to measure outcomes, but to reveal qualities. Not whether we survive, but how. Not whether we conquer, but whether we connect. Not whether we eliminate suffering, but whether we grow compassion in the midst of it. Perhaps the experiment is about watching values emerge from struggle. The hardest possibility to face is that the purpose may never be something we can understand. A lab rat cannot grasp the reasons behind a human's experiment. A bacterium cannot know why it is cultured. The gap between us and whoever runs the test might be that vast. We can speculate, but our language, our concepts, may simply be too small to grasp the real reason. But maybe that's okay. Maybe not knowing is part of it. If the purpose were obvious, if the test were clear, then the experiment would be spoiled. Uncertainty forces us to search, to create meaning, to wonder. Maybe the purpose isn't hidden. Maybe the purpose is to see what meaning we invent when it's not given to us. And in the end, whether the purpose is curiosity, preparation, data, entertainment, morality, or something beyond our reach, the fact remains. Life continues. The test goes on. And in our daily choices, in kindness and cruelty, in survival and collapse, in discovery and imagination, the purpose, whatever it is, slowly unfolds. If Earth is a test field, then the question that lingers most is what it would mean to pass. Tests usually have outcomes, marks, thresholds. They measure something, and at the end you know whether you've succeeded or failed. But what would that look like on the scale of a planet, of a species, of billions of years of life? What could possibly count as passing for us? One idea is survival. Maybe the simplest metric is whether we last. Countless species have risen and fallen, countless civilizations have come and gone, and we are the latest to stand at the edge of history. If we endure, if we adapt through climate change, technological upheaval, and self-made dangers, then perhaps that is enough. Passing might simply mean persistence, carrying the thread of life forward when so many others have snapped. But maybe that bar is too low. Cockroaches and bacteria will likely outlive us, and if survival is all that matters, they've already passed with flying colours. So maybe the test for us is different. Maybe it's not just about lasting, but about what we do with our time here. Another possibility is harmony. Maybe passing means learning to live within the balance of the planet instead of against it. Civilizations in the past have collapsed when they overreached, when they stripped their resources bare, when they ignored the limits of their environment. If we learn to live differently, to balance technology with sustainability, to create progress without destruction, then maybe that's the real victory. Then again, maybe it's about morality. Not whether we build towers or rockets, but whether we learn kindness, justice, compassion. Imagine observers watching, not impressed by skyscrapers or bombs, but by small acts of cooperation, by people choosing generosity in the face of scarcity, peace in the face of conflict. Maybe passing isn't about achievement at all, but about character. Or perhaps the measure is connection. As individuals, we often feel separate, isolated. But the truth is we are interdependent. With each other, with other species, with the planet itself. Maybe the exam is whether we can recognize that and act on it. Whether we can move from me to we, from self-interest to shared interest. If we can do that, then perhaps we've shown what the experiment was meant to reveal. There's also the possibility that passing means transcendence, moving beyond the conditions of the test altogether. Maybe the goal is to reach a level of intelligence or awareness where we step outside the laboratory, contact with whoever is watching, or entry into some larger community of civilizations, or even an evolution of consciousness beyond the physical. Perhaps the test is whether we can graduate from this classroom into something bigger. But we can't ignore the darker option, that maybe there is no passing, only data. Maybe every outcome, survival or extinction, cooperation or collapse is equally valid to the watchers. In that case, The question of passing is ours alone. Maybe the test doesn't grade us, we grade ourselves. And maybe that's the real point. Maybe passing doesn't mean pleasing the watchers at all, but creating meaning in the face of uncertainty. Building justice, seeking knowledge, loving each other, finding beauty, even if no one is keeping score. Perhaps what matters is not some external judgment, but the values we choose to live by while the experiment runs. So what does passing mean? Survival, harmony, morality, connection, transcendence, or simply choosing meaning for ourselves? We don't know. And maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe the answer only comes at the end, or maybe the act of asking the question is itself part of the exam. So after all of this wondering, after extinction stories and civilizations collapsing, and the thought of aliens, future humans, or cosmic architects watching from the shadows, it's worth taking a breath. Whether or not any of it is true, whether or not Earth really is a test field, one fact remains. Here we are, alive, together, in this moment. Look around your space right now. Maybe you're in bed with the light low. Maybe you're outside with night sounds drifting in. Maybe you're just letting this play in the background while you do something else. Wherever you are, the air you're breathing, the body you inhabit, the thoughts flickering through your mind, all of it is part of this world. Test or no test, it is what we have. And that, strangely, is enough. Maybe life is a designed experiment. Maybe it's random chance. Maybe there's a scorecard waiting somewhere. Or maybe not. But the meaning we create in our daily choices doesn't vanish either way. Kindness still matters. Connection still matters. Curiosity still matters. Sometimes the most human thing we can do is accept the uncertainty and keep going anyway. To love even when loss is inevitable. To build even when collapse is possible. To search for meaning even when answers are hidden. If that is part of the test, then we're living it already. If it isn't, then we're still living something worth carrying with care. So whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not there is a purpose, whether or not there is a hidden exam waiting in the future, here we are, on this planet, in this moment, together. And maybe that's all we ever needed to notice.